As the markets continue to move up and down, it's definitely interesting to see what high-profile financial celebrities are saying about the market. The Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki called Bitcoin the fastest horse in a race against gold and silver's performance. He actually blasted the Federal Reserve for printing trillions of dollars and pointed to Bitcoin being a potential bargain at today's current market prices. So, Kiyosaki has been predicting that Bitcoin will eventually outperform gold and silver. According to a tweet made by Kiyosaki on 8th of August, he actually called Bitcoin the sleeper investment choice in a race against precious metals and the S&P 500. He argued that while gold was up 35% compared to the S&P 500 at 3%, Bitcoin was actually likely to become the fastest horse in the group. He also pointed to silver as the best investment to watch, which he said was trading at 30% below its all-time high. In a subsequent tweet, Kiyosaki called financial savers the biggest losers in the current economic climate, in part due to the US Federal Reserve trend towards negative interest rates. So, to be honest, he's actually right. The Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars isn't really good for anyone. I mean, technically, yes, it does prop up the economy and it does make the stock market rally and look all shiny and new. But if we take a deep dive onto what's actually going on, this isn't more than a superficial prop up. I mean, of course, the Federal Reserve's job is, I guess, essentially to protect the economy from crashing, but at the same time, you don't want to implement certain things that have a very bad long-term effect. I mean, we're seeing the S&P 500 and many shares just carry on rallying, despite the fact that the economy isn't actually representing the stock market anymore. And this is probably one of those cases where this has gone on for a little too long. I mean, if we do look at the stock market ever since the corona crash happened in March of 2020, we can see that the stock market has actually made a very quick V-shaped recovery and has even gone 50% past the corona's high, which means that the stock market already rebounded its losses, which makes me wonder, why do they keep pumping money into the stock market, and why does the Federal Reserve continually print more money despite the fact that this clearly isn't going to be a long-term solution? I would say that Kiyosaki is probably going to come out right on this one, because right now what we're seeing is the fact that the Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars, definitely making finite resources like precious metals such as gold and silver to be a much more attractive investment, considering that when you're printing all these trillions of dollars, it just devalues the dollar and creates very, very high rates of inflation, the likes of which we haven't really seen before. So to be honest, right now he's right about that. You know, savers, people who are saving money and storing it in the bank, and even worse, in cash, are most certainly going to be losing a large percentage of that every year, considering this is So to be honest, to have a bet with Bitcoin, it doesn't actually seem that far-fetched. Although I can't see Bitcoin going to insane highs like it did back in the day, I would say that Bitcoin is definitely a very, very secure investment against the levels of inflation and against the dollar crashing. I mean, to be honest, right now, Bitcoin doesn't really seem like a bad investment, considering it's part of the digital future and cryptocurrencies are increasingly becoming more and more integrated with society. I can definitely see why more and more people are choosing to invest in Bitcoin over assets that some, such as Robert Kiyosaki, would even call a fake asset. And the reason he calls stocks fake assets is because Robert Kiyosaki calls them derivatives. Mutual funds are loaded with fees that make the rich richer and you poorer. And insiders know mutual fund investors put up 100% of the money. They take 100% of the risk, yet gain less than 20% of the profits. And remember, assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money from your pocket. By following that simple formula, you can always tell the difference between a real and a fake asset. So, I mean, that opinion is quite controversial, considering stocks actually have made a lot of people rich. I would say that it just depends on the stock you're investing. As long as you're not gambling, stocks are definitely not a bad asset to have. It's just mainly about diversifying your portfolio. But as we were talking about Bitcoin and the markets, it's essentially not really fueled by valuations anymore. A recent trend that I've noticed, and this is something that most investors know, is that the markets are fueled essentially by fear. You see, emotions dictate the prices of stocks, and I'm not just saying that lightly. If you look at the graphs and how it relates to the amount of fear in the public perception, and then you look at the graphs going up and you look at the amount of greed going on in public perception, that's essentially what causes bubbles. You know, if we look back at the dot-com bubble that burst around the early 2000s, we can see that was mainly due to greed. You know, people were just investing huge amounts of money in any company that had a .com at the end of it. They were getting really greedy and just hoping to make a quick buck or a quick thousand in order to just increase their earnings. And this is what you call greed and emotion, and these things really do mess up the market. So to be honest, I can see emotions coming into play when people want to invest with Bitcoin. They're most certainly scared of what the Federal Reserve is doing, because at this rate, it hasn't really been done before. And to be honest, I would be right to be scared, because even though precious metals may be a safer bet than Bitcoin because it's all digital, I would say that having a secure position of at least maybe 5% of your net worth in Bitcoin isn't a bad investment in this time. Nobody can realistically predict what's going to happen, and I would rather have some Bitcoin than not have any of it at all. So Robert Kiyosaki is right to be optimistic about the future of Bitcoin, because to be honest, the future of the US doesn't really look great right now. And with the Federal Reserve propping up the stock market every time it takes a dive and going ahead to buy corporate bonds, I really can't see this turning out to be something other than another economic collapse perhaps. But I guess we're going to have to see. So what do you think about Robert Kiyosaki's statements on Bitcoin? Do you think he's right about it? Do you think he's wrong? I certainly would disagree with him on the stocks part. I do think stocks aren't that bad, but I can understand where he's coming from. And to be honest, Bitcoin is definitely a secure bet. Maybe not 2 years, 3 years from now, but 30 years from now, who knows where that valuation could be. It's definitely going to be interesting to see it all unfold. Just make sure that you're the person who doesn't just watch it unfold all from the sidelines, because you don't want to be someone who misses out on a great opportunity to take advantage of some bug in stock prices. If the stock market does crash again, you'll definitely want to go into ahead and pick up some bargain shares. And if Bitcoin does crash, you're definitely going to want to pick it up now for use in the future. So if you don't want to play a part in the stock market or Bitcoin and you think it's all going to crash, by all means, you don't need to. You don't need to be a part of that. I would just say pay attention to what you are invested to and just make sure that whatever is your asset class, you know exactly where it's headed 10 and even 20 years from now. That way, when an economic collapse does happen or the markets do crash again, you at least know exactly what's going to happen and you're completely fine.